Welcome to episode 291 of Sports Geek. On this CEO series episode, I chat with Motherwell FC CEO Alan Burrows about fan ownership and letting go of digital.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host, who is preparing a keynote to blow you away, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan. At Sean Callanan is where you can find me on Twitter, and I am actually preparing keynotes ready for 2021. I'm looking forward to getting back on stage at a conference, presenting in front of people in a socially distanced manner, of course. So if you're running a conference or want a presentation on the world of digital gaming and anything in between, please reach out to me. You can contact me anyway, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. As I said, at Sean Callanan or at Sports Geek. And don't forget, you can follow my esports team, Gravitas, a little bit more about an update from Gravitas after this episode interview. Before I jump into my chat with Alan Burrows, I just want to quickly talk about the Sports Biz Zoom calls. They are now held every 2 weeks. Last week, we caught up with a few people to talk about data and sponsorship. It's going to be a big, more of a focus, I think, for 2021. I think more sponsors are going to look at data as a key component and a key deliverable of everything we do in the sponsorship space. Really happy to be joined by several people, including some Sports Geek podcast alumni. Steve Connolly, Tinnis LaRue, Jen Van Dyke, David McKay, to name a few that came along and had a chat. It was really good conversation. Remember, you can watch both of those calls in a replay mode if you are a Patreon subscriber. So before I get into the Patreon subscriber plug, the next one is December 8-9. We're going to be talking developing new revenue in sports. So if you're in the position where you are looking for new revenue, this is the conversation to come to. So December 8-9, check your local schedules for when it is in your part of the world. I really do need people to RSVP. If I don't get enough RSVPs, I'm going to cancel them. I need at least 30 or so RSVPs for it to be worthwhile and to have enough people to have a worthwhile conversation. So if you've come along once or twice before, have a look at your schedule. If you can clear an hour, it's well worth your trouble. It's been well worth my trouble. Done about 60 of these over the 2020, and they've been very valuable to me. Really do appreciate the community of listeners that do join these calls. So if you could RSVP for those on December 8-9, I'd really appreciate it. If you can't make it, well, you can watch them as a Patreon subscriber. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. They are only available to Patreon subscribers, and being a Patreon helps support what I do in this space around sports business content, be this podcast, be it Sports Geek News, if you get that on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, or the Zoom calls. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon to subscribe, and you can do that as personally. You can do that professionally. You as an org can do it, and please go to the show notes for each and every episode and find the people who do support the podcast and check them out. Give the logos a click, find out what they're doing. So if you want to be one of those people, you can do that at sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. That's it for the pre-interview plugs. Hopefully you have to skip forward over all of those, but they're really important. I really do appreciate it. This interview I had last week with Alan Burrows. He's the CEO of Motherwell FC and a podcast listener. So it was really good for him to reach out to say he was listening, and we struck up a conversation to have a podcast conversation about his current role as the CEO of Motherwell, his career, him coming from the world of digital, and some of the challenges of running a football team in the Scottish Premiership. I'll let Alan explain all of that. Here is my chat with Alan Burrows from Motherwell FC. Very happy to welcome Alan Burrows, the CEO of Motherwell FC, to the podcast. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
John, thank you very much for having me. It's an honour.
No problems. Well, part of our CEO series is understanding how clubs operate, but also really how the CEOs got into that role. So the first question I want to ask you is how you got your break into the world of sports.
Oh, I might be as unconventional as it comes, and depending on who you've interviewed for the series, mine's has certainly been a different path to most. I think I broke into the club very much at the bottom level, if you like, of the structure. Started at the very bottom in the kind of, I was going to say the media and kind of comms department. It wasn't really a department; it was me on my own.
So you were running the media and comms. That was your first role, or was that your first role in sports?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'd bounced about. I'd left higher education just at the turn of the millennium, and I'd bounced around a couple of roles. Nothing that was particularly inspiring. My early 20s, as a lot of people do before you find your calling. And as luck would have it, at that time, around about 2004, I was running a fans website.
Okay.
It was just at the kind of birth, if you like, or the kind of explosion of fan message boards. And I had kind of tried to capitalise that in a little bit and bring a bit of positivity into supporting Motherwell at the time. And, that gone on for a couple of years. The club at that point, Motherwell at that point, hadn't really embraced digital. They had volunteers running the website, for example, and the guys done a great job given the kind of parameters they were working under, but it was never really any investment in it. And this is a well-told tale in Scotland, but in 2007, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to, on behalf of the website I was running, go and watch the club in pre-season in Austria, in the Austrian Alps. So I paid for myself to travel over to Austria, planes, trains and automobiles to get there. I'm quite sad I was on my own. And eventually got to the camp. To be fair, the first team manager and the coaching staff at the time invited me in. It let me do some, bear in mind this was 13, 14 years ago, let me do some kind of filming with the camera and speaking to a couple of the players and taking some pictures. And at that point, Sean, that was quite revolutionary for Motherwell at that particular point. That was quite behind the scenes, if you like. So about halfway through that week, the club phoned me, left me a voicemail to say they quite liked what I was doing over there and they would quite like us to come and do something similar for the club. And given it was a club I supported, it was a phenomenal phone call. I could have flew back from Austria back to Scotland myself without the need of a plane. So I was buzzing. It was actually the current Rangers managing director, Stuart Robertson, who gave me the phone. He was in the board at Motherwell at the time. And from there, I really kind of, my initial remit was quite basic, which was come in, kind of try and modernise, if you like, the kind of digital presence, the website.
So this is real. I mean, this is really early digital. So, like you were talking about, using terms like message boards and communicating with fans, like this is pre what we know the social media era. But being in that space, telling a bit of stories, trying to connect them, and so you started in that I guess a traditional comms role around media, trying to get more exposure, but then also starting the initial parts of what would be a digital strategy is what we'd call it these days.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, as you say, there was no Twitter, there was no Facebook at that particular point, or certainly not in the UK. And, a large part of the role at that time was still publications and written publications. And you've seen, it's funny, in the journey between then and now, you've kind of seen the explosion, if you like, of social and digital and, less is more. And that back in then, we were doing 6 to 8 page programs twice a week. Once a fortnight, 2 games a month. So that that was one of the times, the kind of real kind of priorities at that point. But it changed very, very quickly. Also at that point, got into kind of communications. Became about doing a lot more PR. A lot of the kind of club's press office. Bear in mind it's a small club, not a lot of resource. So your MD who's working at both, I suppose, back then particularly, but even still now, you're expected to muck in and do a number of things. It's very much that ethos at the club. So I was doing a number of different things across various, almost I was going to say various departments, but effectively a lot comms, digital, communications, PR. That was kind of all it. And to be quite frank, there was not a real specific, here's your job description, here's your roles and responsibilities. It was, there you go, Alan, there's the ball, go and run with it. Yep. And that worked out quite well. Managed to win a couple of awards, and got a little bit of kudos for what we were doing, and started to build on things, which was quite positive, and it really just kind of grew from there.
And so starting in that head of comms role in 2007, and being in that media space, and then you became CEO of Motherwell in 2014. What were some of the steps that you made, both internally and both also on yourself, to make that step? Because CEOs come from different backgrounds to get into that role. You've obviously come through the media and comms side. What did you do to, I guess, help fill out your resume and help fill out your skill set to move into the CEO role?
Yeah, I was quite lucky at the time, because the CEO prior to her departure was a woman called Leanne Dempster, who's now the CEO at Hibernian in the Scottish Premiership. And her and I, over the last kind of 18 months, we were close all the way through, but certainly the last 18 months became very close. And I suppose, as any good kind of comms, PR, digital guy should be close to the kind of CEO of the company. I think there should be a real kind of synergy between those two roles, if you like. So I'd got a real exposure into the kind of the inner workings of the club, certainly from a finance point of view and from a club structure, a process point of view. And she really invited me in and really gave me an insight into it. And I don't know whether she was succession planning even from that early stage, but I think she probably had one eye on what she might be doing next. And I think she's seen in me the potential for somebody to come in and really potentially develop and take on the role and hopefully develop the club. But that said, it's like anything in life. I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be familiar with this. When you're not necessarily in the top job, you always think about, if I was in the top job, I would do X or Y, and this is how I would do it. And, this is the grand plans I would have in that scenario. It's not quite until you actually sit in the seat and you start to realise why certain things are happening at certain times. And it really, it was very much as it sounds. It was very much a learn on the job process. I have to happen to think that, as much as there's huge merit in higher education, and there's very much merit in all in that element, I also think that very little substitute from actually being dropped completely in the deep end and learning to live on role. As long as you've got a board of directors and a chairman, certainly in a football club parlance, who are going to be patient and help you develop. And I had that, and I had a lot of support from the chairman, a lot of support from the board of directors. And in the first years or two, I certainly felt a big learning curve for me. I had to, as I said, learn on the job a little bit, taking in some of the experiences that Leanne had given me at the time, but also learning new things every day too. And to be quite honest, and I still do it this day, make mistakes. I was making mistakes, but I think the key for me was, and the way I've always tried to be through my life is identify when I've made a mistake, why I made the mistake, and how to try and make the mistake again. And I think that's been a key part of my own personal development. So, I'm always quite self-critical and quite self-analytical. And I tend to do that probably, West of Scotland males, you might not be familiar, are by very definition very hard on themselves and not very keen to talk up what they do. So it was a steep learning curve, but also an enjoyable one. I had to go over some confidence issues at the start. I think, if I've been honest with myself, I think when you make that big step up into the top role, you have doubts, and I spent a lot of time having a lot of doubts. But as things slowly get into place and you start to put your plans across and people start to buy into it, then you can start to see gradual progression. And hopefully in the 6.5 years I've been doing it now, that I think I'm finally feeling comfortable in my own skin.
It's good. It's very much be careful what you wish for. Like the looking at the top job and saying, "I'll do it this way," and then it's like when you're in the top job, it's completely different. I think the other piece there is also the importance of delegation to your people and let them do their thing, but also take the support from the board to help give you direction. How was that? I guess that initial piece, because early on when you're like effectively given the keys, saying, "Here you go, drive this car, drive this company, drive this club," there's a little tendency to hold on to the steering wheel tight and drive it your way. How did you sort of adjust to that piece in that leadership delegation piece?
It's a very good question, and it was one of the things I probably struggled with most, particularly when it came to comms and digital, because I almost felt it was my baby. I'd built it up over 6 or 7 years, and when you get so close to something, in fact, at times you can often get too close to it. You can get too close to things and not see the wood from the trees is an expression that we have over here. I don't know if you have it in Oz, but certainly, and it felt a wee bit like that. I think one of the difficulties at the club at that particular time was it had been underfunded to a certain extent for a number of years, and not through no fault of anybody's. It was just the nature of the business. It was a couple of years after the Rangers had the financial crisis in Scottish football, and everybody had to really tighten their belts, so there wasn't a lot of cash going about. So from a staff resource and a delegation point of view, I actually found myself doing far too much and spread myself far too thin at the time. Again, whether I was a more experienced CEO at that particular point, whether I would have done it slightly differently, I probably would have. I probably would have looked to try and get more people in if I could earlier. But again, I think that was all part of me finding my feet and finding who I was and actually trying to mould the club in my own vision. I think it took it, and that, with hindsight, it probably was a welcome problem to have. But there were many, and I don't say this lightly, there were many nights where I was still trying to run the club and do things like, for example, what I mentioned earlier. For a year or 18 months after taking the kind of top job at the club, I was still doing the match programme and doing the kind of CEO's role from 95 and genuinely starting the programme at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night and we're doing all-nighters and staying to 4 and 5 in the morning, and I was quite very, very quickly going to burn myself into the ground if I didn't realise that I need to start prioritising what's important. And to be fair to the board at the club, they backed me by helping me improve the staff group, starting to get better people into better roles, create a better structure, a senior management structure at the club, start delegating a lot of the tasks for individual departments, and identifying key personnel to try and appoint. And I think when I look back at the 6.5 years that I had I not done that, I don't think I would have lasted this long, and I don't think we would have had some of the relative success that we've had we not identified a key staff and structure and actually trying to put people into positive positions and giving them the backing to go and do the job as well. And I think hopefully if you speak to my staff at the club, they would say that I try to give them as much support as I possibly can to do that.
Yeah, I think it's really good advice. And over the last 10 to 12 years, we have seen a lot of digital folk that have been driving those channels. And you're right, it is like, I've raised this child and it's now, and in some cases these digital channels are becoming teenagers, right? And so like you've been on the tools, and then when you move into a management or a senior management and you're overseeing a team, there's a little bit of how do you do that handover? And it is a tough process. So you're not alone, but it is something that you need to be able to do if you are going to step up into those management roles, and also allow your staff to potentially make the same mistakes. Because even though you raised the child, we all admit we made mistakes. So being overly critical of staff when you handed over those channels it is a tough one.
The humorous thing is my head of communications is a guy called Grant Russell, who's a terrific guy, really talented. He will be literally spitting out his coffee when he hears me saying that when I let Grant get on with it and things, because as much as I try to give him it, I still, of all the departments at the club, and I think this is, it's natural to gravitate to things that you're interested in. It's natural to gravitate to things that you're passionate about. So, Grant at my place, Grant Russell, probably gets as hard a time as any of the senior managers because I push him hard and I demand more from him, and we demand things to be slightly better. But I think he quite enjoys working in that environment too. But I think you're right. I think it is key, as much as I trust him, it is key to allow him to pave his own way, if you like. And I think over the last year or two, I've certainly got better at that, and I think I've trusted him far more, and I think because of that, we've seen great results. So it is a good lesson there that sometimes you do need to swallow your pride a little bit, and sometimes, as much as you think that you know everything about everything in that particular world, sometimes when you can bring people in that they're actually as equally, if not more talented than you are, and it's about time you give them the ball.
Yeah, definitely. But I guess it does show, a lot of people over the past 10 years have been trying to get the buy-in at the top level on digital, and get a voice at the table and be heard and be seen and hey, this is an important piece. And I think it's something that, one, obviously you've come from that background, so it's easier for people like Grant to communicate that. But that was also something you were working on with the previous CEO to say, hey, this is where digital is. And so it's a vital part. It's part of the game as much as you're managing the algorithm and understanding how to use the tools. There's also that internal game of helping the club and the different parts of the club understand the importance of what digital is doing. Otherwise, you're always, fighting. If you're not going to be part of that club infrastructure, but it does make that piece tough.
Oh, for sure. I speak, I really like the expression on the tools. I still make a point of when I go speak to other clubs for away matches, about actually really like to speak to the people who are still on the tools. I still like to speak to the guys who used to do my role. So I think of all the chief execs in Scotland that I do make a point of, even at speaking to the groundsman or speaking to the digital guy or speaking to the programme guy, whoever it might be, because it's just I kind of feel I feel comfortable or more comfortable in that role, but I also like to just keep my finger to a certain extent on the pulse a little bit. And from that, you do hear a lot of stories, particularly in the digital point of view, and particularly when COVID hits and a lot of budgets get tight and decisions at times have to be made. It's very easy for businesses to cut marketing, to cut comms, to cut digital. It seems like the obvious fat to trim. I suppose from our point of view, and I'm lucky as well, not only is there me at the club who's came from a comms background, we have members of the board whose job it is full-time to work in comms and PR and digital. So really from a football club, from the very top down, we kind of come at it from that approach. It is a very kind of communications, digital, PR focus. And I think that probably helps Grant and his team. So it is a different scenario at our club. Quite often I'm pushing Grant, or not, and quite often, you imagine your kind of digital guys and your comms guys are almost begging the CEO for a minute or 10 minutes of their time to try and put across what they want to do. Whereas actually I'm probably hassling Grant about what's coming next and what we're doing and how we're hassling him. And I'm probably putting too much on his plate at times.
That's a whole other set of problems that Grant's got that other teams, other digital managers got, but it's a good problem to have. Again, he
manages it very well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've touched on your career and from a CEO point of view, but please give the listeners an idea of both the Scottish Premiership and Motherwell, whether they be people in the US or Australia that probably have some familiarity with the Scottish Premiership and maybe have seen Motherwell on socials. Give us a little bit of a background of both the Premiership and Motherwell as a club.
Yeah, people, and this is a conversation we get asked a lot, particularly from people in England, actually. You'd be surprised at how often we have to have conversations about where Scottish football fits in terms of the standard, for example. I think most people around the world would be familiar with Rangers and Celtic. They're two huge clubs. Massive worldwide clubs who have a lot of followings in North America and Asia and Australia. And underneath that, there are some big city clubs in Scotland like Hibernian, Heart of Midlothian, Aberdeen. You have the city of Dundee, which is represented by two clubs. Then you have a whole bunch of community clubs who are all roughly the same size, get an average crowd of maybe 4,000 or 5,000, like Kilmarnock and Motherwell and St Johnstone. And people always ask the question from a standard point of view, where does it fit if you compare it to England? Because everybody's kind of a benchmark of where it is in England. And one of the best analogies I heard when you were referencing the standard of Scottish football from a on-the-field point of view is it probably contains all four divisions of England in the one league. So you've got literally Premier League clubs, if you like, in Rangers and Celtic. You've got from the big city clubs and others, maybe a couple of English Championship clubs, maybe a couple of League One clubs and very smaller kind of community-based League Two clubs, if you like, all within the same division. So it's a really diverse league. In terms of Motherwell, we're based about 15 kilometres from the city centre of Glasgow, which is the biggest city in Scotland in the West Coast. And both Rangers and Celtic are within about 9 kilometres of our stadium. So if you imagine you've got two clubs who get attendances on a weekly basis of 60,000 and 50,000 literally on your doorstep. So that presents a whole bunch of challenges to us. But I think we're talking a lot of figures today, actually in Scotland, on the back of COVID. And in Europe, Scotland is the most watched league by head of population in any league in the whole of Europe. So, which is a great start for us. It shows you the importance of fans and how fans play such a big role in the game here. Yep. And obviously COVID's making that more difficult because as long as fans are locked out, that makes it more difficult for all the clubs. But, it's a really fan-driven league. It's a very... It's traditional, if you like, whilst having a modern kind of flicked it, if you like, in a sense. So yeah, I'm very passionate about it. I've lived here all my life. I've been immersed in the game for a long period of time. But yeah, so it's dominated traditionally by two big clubs, two Leviathan clubs, if you like. But you've got a lot of really good clubs in behind it. There's a lot of community focus in there. There's a lot of fan engagement focus in there. So yeah, it's a really passionate country about football. Football is the national sport here, and it dominates every other sport in the country. So yeah, we're quite for a nation who traditionally over the last 20 years haven't been very good at it. Unfortunately, we're a nation who are absolutely obsessed by football.
Yeah, and it's really unique, I guess, from a league point of view to have like one of the things when you have a league, it's trying to get balance and competitive integrity, and trying to get the league, make every match a winner. But having two, like you said, giants in Celtic and Rangers there, how does that, I guess, make for the dynamic and of a league overall? But like where Motherwell are positioning themselves and setting goals and what your fans are looking for.
It's a difficult one, Sean. Because for example, both myself and my team at Motherwell, from a digital and comms point of view, marketing point of view, follow a lot of MLS. And if you compare us, for example, for MLS, the amount of different winners that MLS will have for MLS Cup, I think allows them to market quite considerably their fans that actually come and support us this year or engage with us this year, because there's a chance that we might win Sports Shield, we might win MLS Cup.
Yep.
In Scotland, there hasn't been a team out with Rangers and Celtic who won the top league in nearly 35 years. Mm-hmm. So that presents a whole bunch of challenges when you're dealing commercially with how do you, because if you think of sport, as much as everybody enjoys sport, the whole essence of sport is winning and losing, really, if you think at elite level. And if you're a supporter, the dream is always how do you win things? How do we achieve success? And it's a conundrum that people in Scotland have had to try and get around, certainly from the clubs out with Rangers and Celtic for a period of time, about how do you still sell what is great about this league without ever really being able to look people in the face and say, listen, we're sitting here with a genuine bona fide chance of winning the league. And that's not to sound negative. It's, to be honest, it's as honest as I can be. If you compare budgets, for example, Celtic recently played PSG in the Champions League and got quite heavily defeated by PSG. But actually, PSG are, the Celtic are closer to PSG in terms of budget than we are to Celtic. So that just kind of gives you an idea of just how difficult it is for us to compete at that level. But that's why we try. That's why we try and sell the league on different things about fans and the passion and the community element. It's about how we represent the area and the people and ethos of the community, and that's what we've tried to tap into at Motherwell, particularly from a digital and comms point of view. Is what is it that makes Motherwell? Why do we do it? I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek, and his kind of notion about why is it we do what we do? Why do we get up in the morning? Why do we have a football club? And a lot of what we've tried to do over the last couple of years is represent the people of our town using that and actually be a force for good in the area. And if you can't win tournaments and you can't win leagues, then at least have a positive impact on the people around about you, the people who love the club, and that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's what Scottish football does quite well. Yeah,
and it is about that broader piece. I mean, all teams you want to win, but there is only going to be one winner of every league and every league around the world every year. And so winning can't be the only message. That is that broader piece, which does lead me to some, significant event that, has happened in your tenure as CEO, moving through two ownership transitions, but the last one moving to fan ownership in 2016. How much has that played a big part into that strategy you just talked about the fans feeling like truly part of the club?
Huge. I think it's massive. I mean, our club was born out of the community, if you like, and most football clubs, certainly around the world, but certainly in the UK, where effectively most of them back 130 years ago were works teams or local community teams that have developed. And just in the natural transition of football, they were bought by big business and, change in the dynamic changes. So we've kind of came full circle, if you like. That's the way I like to think about it, where we went from being effectively a community a works team to a kind of community fan-focused team way back in the early stage of our history. Went through the kind of private ownership model, went to the kind of rich benefactor model, and then eventually full circle as it back into the hands of the community and the supporters. I think it's a good fit for us as a club. I think it's a very working class kind of area that we're from. It's kind of old industrial, if you like. It's very much, we're called the Steel Men. That's our nickname. It's very much in a kind of old steel town. Unfortunately, deindustrialisation over the last 2 or 3 decades has meant that sadly not a lot of it's left.
Yep.
But the kind of ethos of the town, the ethos of the people and the spirit of the area and the kind of hard-working credentials that people in this area are noted for, I think we try and reflect through the football team. And I think that fits really nice with fan ownership. I think it gives the fans a greater feeling about the club and why they're there and what we're there to do. I say to you again what I said previously, that if we exist every day to make people's lives better, which is a kind of our kind of unofficial motto, then who better to do it for than the fans in the local community, not for shareholders or any individual, and that's really helped. I think it creates a closer bond with the supporters. Don't get me wrong, it's not a silver bullet. It comes with its own challenges. Of course, it does as CEO. There's a lot of emotion attached to it, clearly, because people feel very close to the club. They feel it represents them. They feel it ties in with their family and their friends and their life. So that's a very precious commodity that I feel a great deal of responsibility in looking after at any one particular time. But I think the sense of togetherness that we have with the local community, I think the giving them a little bit of, it sounds cliche, but giving them a bit of ownership of the club in many ways, and giving them to appoint people to a board that holds me to account, holds the directors to account. I think that's just a healthy place for it to be. And I think if supporters know that every decision that's getting taken is for the best interest of the club, then genuinely deep down, I think most fans of most clubs would want that to be the kind of the number one priority before anything else, I think. So yeah, I think it has far more positives than negatives. And I think for a club like Motherwell, a small community club in kind of heartland, North Lanarkshire in Scotland, old industrial, working class, I think it works really, really well together.
And so the model itself, like there's a few different fan ownership models around the world. You've got the Green Bay Packers, where people are, effectively buying shares, and they're a piece of paper that say they're a part of an equity piece. You've got the clubs in my part of the world in the AFL that are member run or member backed organisations. So as a certain season ticket holder, you can vote people onto the board, but you're not effectively, I don't have any equity in the club. Like, what is the model for Motherwell?
Yeah. We have an industrial providence society, so what we have is effectively a one-member, one-vote system. But what that one-member, one-vote does, and this was a very deliberate from our point of view when we took over Fannership, was effectively elect a board to effectively represent the majority shareholder, which is the support.
Yep.
And we have two boards deliberately. We have their board and we have an executive board, which is effectively the directors of the company. The guys who have got skin in the game, if you like, when it comes to your fiduciary responsibility.
Yep.
But effectively one holds the other to account in this sense. And there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination there between, what we're doing, big ticket items. But I think what we were very deliberate on doing, Sean, was making sure that it didn't become like a committee run where every decision had to be mulled over by 20 different people, each having 20 different emails to discuss the colour of a tie or design of a bar scarf. I think we were very conscious that you can't run a business in that way. There has to be some sort of executive control. And to be fair, I think the cornerstone of the success that we've had in the last 4 years, where other fan ownership models in Scotland, by the way, have failed, is because I think we have created that separation. And it's not, listen, I'm a fan of the club, and everybody who is a director of the business are dyed in the wool Motherwell for. So we're as well as being fan owned, we're also fan ran. Yeah. But I think there is an acknowledgement that there has to be a business there as well. As much as we want everything to be fan focused and fan centric, I think there's also a P&L, there's also a balance sheet, there's also a cash flow. And all those things have to be monitored closely every day. And I have to have the ability to be nimble, particularly through crises like COVID, for example. Yep. I need to be able to make decisions. And thankfully, I not only have a board of directors, but I have a Welsh Society, which is the name of the fan group, the Welsh Society board, who I think are very conscious of that. And we try and involve them. Listen, could it be better in areas? Of course, it can always be better. But I think generally we've managed to crack it really well. In terms of the other model, what we ask fans to do is they put in a monthly contribution. And that raises an annual fee every year, and the society then will work with us to, make it maybe be capital investment projects. It might be in any one year, if it's a cash flow's tight, they might just put a working capital investment in there just to tide us over if needs be. So that's how it kind of works, and that over the period has generated 7 figures for the football club. It's low 7 figures, but from our point of view, that's a lot of money for a club of our size who maybe only turns over £4 million, for having your owners putting in over £1 million of that. And again, I go back to it's a small industrial working class area. That's been a very healthy return from our point of view. And again, I just think it gives fans that feeling of that they're contributing over and above their season ticket and their shirt and their, whatever it might be, they might buy their programme or whatever they might buy in a match. They also feel emotionally invested because they're also putting in their £10 a month or their £15 a month. Yep. And they can see things that are hopefully, and I, over the last couple of years, are seeing things that are coming up round about the ground. We replaced the scoreboard and we've made the pitch much better, and we've hopefully made, areas of the stadium much more modern. And it's a lot of that's coming directly from their cash that they invest in it. So people are putting their money in and hopefully seeing a direct return when they come to their stadium in terms of the look and feel of what is an old stadium we have. So yeah, it's worked for us. I think it's done really well. This is the biggest existential crisis, I suppose, if you want to call it that we've faced in terms of COVID-19. And so far, whilst it's been extremely difficult, we've been quite robust through it at the moment. So I think hopefully that bodes well for the future.
Yeah, definitely. I think that piece of the, you're already tapping into that tribal nature of fandom, and that's why you're a fan. But then you're adding this intrinsic value of, your season ticket with this option and being that signing up is actually helping the club. And that piece, whether it is financial, but also you can influence the decision. Don't be the guy in the pub that's there with their beer complaining about things. Be part of the solution, and it becomes an easier sell for you from your season ticket point of view.
Yeah, I agree. And people always say to me that people are sceptics either at our club or elsewhere, always saying, but what do I get for my money? What is it I get? And because we've got ourselves as a society into a very much I spend this amount of cash, I want something back in return for it. I think what people at Motherwell are going to get and what I think fan ownership can provide is not necessarily a bricks and mortar or something inanimate that you can pick up. It's actually just the spirit of the club. It's the ethos of the club. It's the decision-making process. It's actually making sure that as a club, what I'm investing is that, if a decision's to be made and it's for the benefit of the club, that'll be made from that basis. And I hope, with the lot of work that we do in the community in terms of the decisions that we've made, in terms of even down to daft things like, we had a real scratch point with supporters about the allocations for Rangers and Celtic matches where we were splitting a stand to get more Rangers and Celtic fans into the ground, just a commercial reason. Yep. And it was becoming a real grating point from a lot of supporters in that one stand. And as a club, despite the fact that we knew it was going to cost us money, and despite the fact that all conventional wisdom at that point as a director or as a CEO says, well, why would you take any decision that may cost you a material amount of money? We decided, listen, what's more important here is the supporters and their enjoyment of the match day, and the fact that if we're to make them believe that as a fan-owned club they have actually got a real proper influence in the club, then we've got to take decisions like that. And that's what I think makes our club unique, that we are prepared to make decisions that on the surface don't always make sense if you're looking at it from a purely unadulterated business point of view, but actually the longer-term vision about this is a club that actually puts our supporters first. It puts everything about what they do on a match day and away from a match day at the very front of what we're doing. And I think that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a long time to get people to really believe that's what they've got as a football club. And I think, both in terms of how we communicate through digital comms, which I think is absolutely critical in that, and the decisions that we make, hopefully over the period of 4 or 5 years or 4 years since fan ownership, I think a lot of our fans, despite the fact that our form on the pitch has fluctuated from being 2 cup finals in Europe down to the other end where we've been scraping at the bottom. Yep. Because that's the nature of the beast of a club like Motherwell. I think most fans have stayed at a fairly kind of even level, and I think that's one of the key successes that I take from it, because to achieve that at a football club is very hard.
Yeah, and and I do talk about it a lot on the podcast. I think the AFL here, the Australian rules do it really well, and they really pushed in really hard on membership to a point that 15, 20 years ago there was 25,000 members. And now we've got clubs with, approaching 100,000 members, and it obviously at different levels. but it's also got to a point now, and I've talked about a lot, that it's at guilt level marketing. It's like when you're a member and you find someone else who says they're a fan or a supporter, the fan goes, well, why aren't you a member? You should be, if you're a real supporter of the club, then you should be a member. And so they become a real powerful marketing force for you.
If you've got to that point, you've cracked it. Because if you've got people doing your sales on your behalf because they're so engaged, they feel so part of the club, then you're really on a winner at that particular point. Because I think that's the hardest part to get to, that your core supporters actually believe so much in you, not only as the team. And because, listen, most people support the team. They don't necessarily support the suits or the clubs or the guys who run it. They're there to support, if it's football, it's 11 men on the pitch, or soccer, it's 11 men in pitch. But actually, if you can get to the point where actually they believe that the people off the field are running it in such a way where they're actually proud to say, "Come on, let's cajole them into trying to do it," then I think they've nailed it. And certainly we've been very impressed in terms of the way the AFL have done that and taken some inspiration from that. And some of our growth numbers when it comes to season tickets and members, although the numbers may seem modest, if you examine them against some bigger clubs, I mean, we've grown our season tickets numbers, almost by 20%. It doesn't seem like a massive amount, but for us, it's huge. And we've always used to say, if we can put another 1,000 on the gate, that makes a material difference to the club. And we've actually, over a period of 4 or 5 years, we managed to do that. And I think it all just boils down to exactly what you've said. It's actually making people feel as if they're really emotionally invested in what it is you're doing,
So it does set up, and you've mentioned a few times, can't talk 2020 without talking about COVID, but you sort of got to 2018, 2019 and last year, and you're on this step rise of membership and fan ownership coming on board, and then 2020 hits and COVID hits. How has, in the broad sense, how has 2020 been, and how has it affected Motherwell FC? If we sort of go back to the start of the year, it affected the end of last year's season, 2019, 2020?
Yeah, we were one of the few leagues, I think it was about 5 or 6 leagues in Europe, who decided to curtail their season early, and it was a very controversial decision over the years. You people who might not follow Scottish football so closely, there's a battle going on at the minute with Celtic. We're going for 9 championships in a row, which has only been done twice in Scottish football history before, one by Celtic in the 60s and one by Rangers in the 1990s. And Celtic, we're going for 9 this year. And the league being curtailed give them that 9th title, which effectively means this season, 2020-21, they're going for 10 in a row to try and break the record. So you can imagine there was a lot of... I was actually a director of the league at the time who had to take that decision. So it was a very frosty couple of months, as there was a lot of emotions on both sides of the fence, because in Scotland that's a really big thing for a lot of people. In terms of how it's from a Motherwell point of view, the curtailment of the season was quite beneficial, actually. We were sitting in third place at the table at the time, and we were confirmed in third place, the best of the rest, if you want to call it that, as kind of unofficially titled in Scotland. And that allowed us to go back into European football for the first time in 6 years, which was brilliant. It was the highest finish in 6 years. So we, from our point of view, we were one of the winners from that, albeit... I say winners, it's very difficult to be in a situation to be a winner when effectively you've been unable to trade properly for now the best part of 9 or 10 months. Yep. And I go back to a bit of what I said at the start of the podcast, that if you think of Scotland, I mean, the 48% of on average, 48% of the revenues of Scottish clubs as an average comes from supporters, which is like double and treble the likes of leagues round about us. You can see very quickly why, in a COVID world where we can't commercialise match days either through the turnstiles or in hospitality, well, that becomes a real issue really quickly. So not having fans in the ground now since March has been extremely difficult. As I said, no sponsorship, advertising, hospitality, these things, even the use of our venues for, private parties, functions, conferences, all the ways you would normally sweat an asset that you have through your premises, we've not been unable to do. So it's been a really, really, really tough time off the field. We have been a bit more robust, I think, because we've managed our finances fairly well over the last couple of years, and together with some really effective player trading. We sold a player to Hull City in the English Championship in January for a 7-figure fee. And we sold a midfielder in the summer to Celtic for what was almost double our record fee. It was, I was about to say the fee there. Actually, it's a part of a confidentiality agreement, so I'll not blab that out. But It was a significant sum of money for the club. Yep. And the real frustration with COVID, Sean, is that we had big plans for that money. Yep. We had real, plans for, capital expenditure products. Can we get a proper training ground? Can we look to restart? I mean, our ground and stadium at times is 75 years old in some areas. So, not particularly fit for 2020, or certainly needing a lot of work to modernise for 2020 standards. And it's never been a lack of will from our point of view to do these big projects. It's always been a lack of cash, either as down payment for additional financing or the financing itself, depending on the level. So we had very much a plan to be, selling those two big academy assets. We brought them through our club academies, James Scott and David Turnbull, with a view to selling them on. And unfortunately, for the first 10 months almost of that money, we've effectively been using it to mitigate against losses. And that's been a real shame. Listen, in the grand scheme of things, if you to offer me that versus not having those sales and been really having the wolves at the door at that particular point, then clearly I would take that. I would clearly take the way we've went. It's one of those kind of frustrations that we've got, that and just at the time we were feeling as if this is how we take a club to the next level. This is how we, when we first come into the club in fan ownership, we had over 2 million of external debt. We wiped it out. We paid everything back. We had done a lot of the things that we had to do in terms of the safety of the ground. We'd really got ourselves to a level where we felt we were about to kick on, and then COVID hit. And it's effectively back in the trenches, unfortunately, for a lot. And that's the way it is at the moment for clubs. It's very much in the trenches. There's been some good news just recently in terms of in England, albeit it's governed differently from Scotland, but in England there seems to be now a look to gradual return to fans in the stadium, and hopefully by the time people listen to this, we'll have some pathway back to a more normal, I would consider normal trading situation that we have in the club, because at the moment we are losing a significant amount of revenue through lack of trading in various different areas on and off the pitch. And that can only go for so long, not only for my club but other clubs in Scotland, before it really starts to become extremely serious.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot of leagues around the world that aren't completely powered by the TV money, that that you can get away, like when a big chunk of your revenue is from in-stadium tickets, hospitality, and everything surrounding it. Those leagues have had to be nimble to try to find a space where that works, because the playing the games and getting some TV money doesn't really cover a lot of the bills. I did want to sorry, go.
It's interesting. I'm going to say that this is one of the few times, I suppose, in COVID where it actually helps to be a slightly smaller club, naturally, because naturally your cost base is lower. Everybody's revenue almost reverts down to almost nothing, taking away TV differences. And if everybody's at nothing, the people whose costs are the highest hit the ground hardest. So actually in many situations, that's why we look at the English Championship for a minute. I think they're under huge pressure, because a lot of clubs down there are spending huge amounts of money to try and get to the promised land of the Premier League, cut away the TV, cut away the match day revenues, which a lot of them survive on, and they're really up against it. So actually, for very once, but a kind of small, modest club actually can work to your benefit.
Yeah. Well, it's much easier to make yourself a smaller target if you're small to begin with, is pretty much what you're saying. I want to concentrate on a couple of initiatives you have rolled out in the last couple of months. Obviously, there's only a few things you can do with no matches being played and no fans available. You shared the suicide prevention messages now on the club sleeves as an initiative. Was that born out of COVID? Was it something that you were working on prior to? Did it accelerate around this period? Because obviously it's been a tough time for mental health, over 2020 overall.
Yeah, it's been something the club have been immersed in now for probably about 10 years, Sean. We've been having, unfortunately, in West Central Scotland, their own pandemic that's not had much media attention, and unfortunately is suicide. A huge, massive problem in our area, particularly in Motherwell. I estimated, not this calendar year, but last calendar year, we may have lost anything between 30 and 40 young men who committed suicide just in our small support group, which is a massive issue. So it's something we tackled. It initially kind of arrived, unfortunately, a door, at the 2009-10, where one of our ex-players, a guy called Paul McGrillen, took his own life. It then became really personal to the club when we had members of staff and their direct family, unfortunately, commit suicide. So from then on in, we really seen it as a cause that we wanted to very much get behind and shine a torch on, because unfortunately, even in 2020, it's still a massive taboo. So what I decided to do, that's not true. Not I decided that makes it mean as if I've got the kind of driving it. Is what we as a club decided to do, both my predecessors and I, was to really use our platform. And I think that's the key point here. It's use our platform to actually do a force for good in the local community, in the local area, with an issue that is really impacting in the local community, in the local area. And I think that's one of the things, talking about what Motherwell Football Club, and particularly going back to being fan-owned and what the things you can do, is one of the things that I'm extremely conscious of. I mentioned deindustrialisation in the local area. Motherwell Football Club are probably one of the oldest, most established businesses in the whole community. Most of the old steelworks, most of the old heavy industry, the coal mines are all gone. We're still here. And I believe we're a pillar of the local area. I think we've got to the point where we've actually got an obligation to use our platform to actually shine a light on these topics. So as well as having the suicide prevention message on our strip, and as well as having the helpline numbers signposted round about the ground and in the matchday programme and on the scoreboard every week, we also use digital and comms, really heavily in this area. We've done a Christmas ad last year, and instead of the usual Christmas ad that football clubs normally do, which is sell your products and tell everybody how wonderful it is to buy a scarf or a teddy bear or a ball, we actually done a video that highlighted suicide. And because at this particular time of year, it's a bigger problem. We're doing it again in 2020. In fact, we've been more ambitious again in terms of the size and the scale of the advert and the impact that's going to have. But we've done a number of viral videos. For example, we've used our first team players to talk directly down to the camera, down the barrel of the camera. And I hope to actually directly communicate with people in our area. And I think that went viral, got 500,000 or 1 million hits just on Twitter alone, or views on Twitter alone. We've done other ones. We've interviewed the wife of the player, Paul McGrillen, who passed away, and tried to tell her story. So it just goes back to what I said in terms of it's an issue that's really important to us. It's an issue that's really important to the club in the area. But I think football clubs, and when people talk about football clubs, quite often at the very top level, it's hard to even imagine it's just a regular punter about what, how far away it is removed from the general everyday fan. But I think at clubs like Motherwell, which are community focused, that serve and exist for the supporters, I think we really have an opportunity to get into people's lives, suicide, traditionally men 16 to 40, hardest target group to reach. Football clubs, if you look at our demographics, Sean, it's males, it's 16 to 40, it's exactly who we've got. So therefore, we've got to talk about those issues, and it's something that I'm extremely passionate about. It's something the club are extremely passionate about, and will continue to shine a light, despite the fact that it's a taboo, and despite the fact that I'm conscious that people go to the football at times to forget their problems and live their life and have fun and have a drink and have a beer with their mates. But I also think there is a space for us there to put those issues there without overburdening people, without battering people over it with it all the time. But I think we can be there in that space, using our platforms. And we've had living examples, and I say living deliberately. We've had living examples of people who have actually told us that the club's messaging, the signposting, the kind of awareness that we've done has actually genuinely saved people's lives. When people have been at the point where they feel as if they're going to do something that's irreversible, they've thought back to the helpline for the club, or something's inspired them to pick up the phone and get help. And I've always said to everybody, if we've done that for one person, and we've saved one person, then every video, every ad, every sponsored board, every strip sponsor, everything we've ever done is worth it just for that one person, because how much value do you place in someone's life? So
exactly, like you just said, the ability for football teams and sports teams overall to use the platform, for a message that needs discussing and needs to be normalised to be able to discuss it. And you're right, it is, here we are, two blokes of an age that need to talk about these kind of things, and football clubs can do that. I think I find the way they've used the platform is very similar to the way Paul Rogers and the AS Roma guys did around the missing children. Again, using your platform as part of what you're doing, and in their case, is doing the signings, but it also spreads this message, and saving lives is a terrific outcome.
I think what's really interesting as well is every club is from a different area, which will have a different dynamic. It'll have a different issue. It's not. Listen, suicide's a problem all over the world, but in Motherwell, in Motherwell, West Central Scotland, it's a really big issue. So what I think is we're passionate about that subject. It's not just to say, because we get approached, as you can imagine, football clubs get approached on a daily basis, particularly as charities are getting squeezed as the economic world gets tighter. Charities get squeezed, they're begging for help. So football clubs could spend every single day picking charities and causes that they want. What we do it actually, and this is, I don't know if this makes us different. I don't think it does. We're not particularly special, but what it's really proud of is we actually do it not because we feel as if we have to do it and it makes a nice line on the CSR report at the end of the year. We actually do it because we want to do it and we really feel passionate about it and we think it makes a difference. And I think, going back to what I said to you earlier on about fans and fans believing in the club and fans believing that the club has a soul and a spirit and something they can really drive forward, I think when you've got that and you're doing that and the people who run the club and the people who are investing in the club want you to do that, then I think again, when I mentioned cracked it, I think when people believe you, I think that's when it's impactful. When people believe that the messages you're putting out is something you truly care about, then I think you'll get much more buy-in from it. And I think when it comes to the anti-suicide message, we have that. I think people believe that the club care about it. I think people believe the club are genuine about it. And I think because of that, we get far more buy-in and success for that. And even daft things like we've done anonymous Zoom calls through this period in COVID. You mentioned how much COVID's impacted. We've got experts in and we've said to fans, listen, turn your camera off in Zoom. Don't just listen to what people have got to say. So if you're feeling it, you can anonymise your name. And it's just, we're putting out those kind of Zoom through our community trust. They've done brilliant work in doing that sort of thing and try to help people through this particular time. And we'll only crank that up because, as you said, unfortunately, COVID-19 and the stresses of lockdowns and restrictions on movement and seeing families is only going to do it. And I think I read a stat the other day in the UK that it's 200% increase in suicide. So we need to double down our efforts to do it, and we will do that.
Terrific, Alan. We could keep talking about the different initiatives. There's some great stuff that you've been doing in the content space. I do suggest that people should be checking out the Inside Motherwell series on YouTube to get a bit of behind the scenes. Come a long way from potentially what you were doing 14 years ago when you were capturing some video, but effectively get you a bit of understanding about what is happening at Motherwell. I want to finish, Alan, with the Sports Geek closing five. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Yes, unfortunately it's not going to be very interesting. It was a Motherwell game. It was 1986. It was St Mirren. We won the game 3-1. Apparently, I can't remember anything about it because I was 4. But apparently, according to my father, who tells me that I was a lucky mascot in my first game, he managed to win that game. So, like I said, being from West Central Scotland, it's football. And
what's your favourite food or your go-to food at a sports event?
I'm hoping this Zoom call isn't going to be broadcast as a video because everybody will take a look at me and think favourite food. It might be actually better to narrow it down what you don't like to eat at a football match. It's funny, I've came a long way because I used to be the guy who would have in Scotland we would call it a pie and a bovril, which might not mean it's a kind of a meat drink and a pie, a pastry and a kind of a beef dish. That makes it sound a lot posher than it actually is. And then I've progressed all the way through the prawn sandwich brigade in the boardrooms and things, but no, I'm going to stick as a traditional football fan in Scotland. I'll stick to a pie and a bovril, and people might need to Google that to find out what that is.
Okay. Well, I have a pie with sauce. I know what a bovril is, but I don't think I've had bovril before. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Twitter. Twitter. Yeah, I'm quite big on Twitter. It's interesting, initially for most people on Twitter use it primarily for a news feed, what's happening, keep updating the world. Obviously, algorithms with Twitter are changing. It's now serving up content that you like to see, but it's still my go-to app first thing in the morning, quickly followed by Instagram.
Terrific. Is there someone that you follow that you suggest that podcast listeners should follow, whether they be someone on Twitter or potentially an author or someone else you follow?
Yeah, I'll tell you somebody you should follow, and I'm going to be selfish because he works for Motherwell, is Grant Russell. Grant is our head of comms, a super, super talented guy. And if you search for him on LinkedIn, actually, he often does a lot of kind of articles on there and talking about what we're doing at Motherwell and the way we're trying to tell stories. And I actually think it's really quite revolutionary. A lot of things we're trying to do in Scotland is taken away from very traditional comms into a very much more modern 2020 vision. So yeah, Grant Russell. So it's Grant Russell _ on Twitter. Check him out. I always joke he somehow got 36,200 followers on Twitter because he used to be quite a popular journalist here in Scotland. Yep. And I always used to joke with him that Twitter are going to oust him one day, and for all the fans that he's actually bought on Twitter. I have that banter with him quite often. He doesn't believe me, but yeah, check Grant out. He's really worth it because it's not just Motherwell content on there. I think he shares a lot of industry content that I think would be really helpful for people, particularly through his LinkedIn as well.
Terrific. Well, we'll put links to Grant's to Grant in the show notes. Lastly, and you might have spoiled it, which is fine. What social media platform is your MVP? And you can answer it personally, but also potentially what platform is working best for Motherwell?
It's funny when I thought about the question. Twitter's mine personally. But if you actually look at a lot of the growth, and we monitor this to the nth degree, we review it, we spend a lot of money on digital monitoring. Instagram is flying for us at the moment. I mean, the growth in Instagram is actually more than Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube combined in terms of percentages. So Instagram's going through the roof. It's going to be interesting to see how Fleets does on Twitter as now everybody kind of buys into this kind of stories.
Everyone's doing stories. I did see the random guy holding up cardboard sign saying, "Not every app needs stories." I tend to agree, but it has been interesting seeing, I guess, sports teams adapt to Twitter Fleets and whether they're going to be a thing.
It's really interesting, Sean, because I've been following a lot of Scottish clubs just to see what they're doing initially, and this is inevitable in the early stages. A lot of it's just migration from Instagram stories just banked on Twitter, which I think probably it's an obvious first thing to do. I think that probably doesn't, and I understand what people are. I think the theory is that a lot of people who don't use Instagram use Twitter or vice versa. Mm-hmm. But I actually think a lot of times that the audience in Instagram is slightly different from Twitter. So I think clubs like us and other clubs are going to have to understand you've got stories on Instagram, and how is that relevant? How do the users interact with the stories on Twitter, on Instagram, and how are they going to do that on Twitter, particularly as the platform's much different? So I think from our point of view, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve when it comes to Fleets to see how it can complement our normal Twitter feed. We've not quite, and I think Grant and I would accept this, we've not quite mastered from an Instagram point of view how we can really get the best out of Instagram stories. So that's something that we'll develop over the course of the year. But it's a fascinating watch. Yeah,
I mean, I've always been treating Instagram as two products, effectively now three, if you want to keep adding. The feed is one thing, and then stories is another. And it's very much, it's also like understanding when your fans are going into that platform. And so Instagram is where you can go and watch back what the day was. It's not live. And so you can go, oh, what was the Motherwell day like? Oh, cool. And you can watch the whole story and get a bit of a recap and how Grant might be pitching it in that space. Whereas Twitter is so live. Like it is what you have got next to you while you're watching the game, and it's this secondary commentary. And it's, and people complain when it's not live, when the algorithm mucks around with it. So it does make, what are Fleets? Like, where does it fit? Unless it becomes, I'm going to watch Fleets every now and again, but most of the time I'm going to be scrolling down my feed. So it's going to be interesting to see where it fits.
It's an interesting dynamic. We were one of the first clubs in Scotland on Twitter to bin match the updates, the kind of 2 minutes corner to Motherwell, 3 minutes header just wide of the post. Mainly because of changing the algorithm, but also because nobody was interacting with them. It's not what somebody wasn't doing. And it's funny, even 2 years later after doing it, you still got a lot of hardcore fans who want that because they became so immersed in it. Mm-hmm. So it's taken a long period of us to do it. I wonder, we've kind of wondered now, can Fleets potentially fill that space potentially, where there is an element to try and tell the story there? But how we're going to get it to work will remain to be seen at this particular stage.
Terrific. Well, where can people find you on the internet if they do want to reach out to you? What is the best platform, and how can we get you more followers and Grant?
Yeah, please everybody follow me so I can get down a bit. It's like I've got 9,000 followers, which for me is brilliant. And Grant and I are having this competition. Grant said to me the other day there that apparently you're considered a social influencer if you have more than 30. So he took great delight in telling me they had more than 30. Listen, the best place to get me by a mile is Twitter, Alan_Burrows. I try my best in there. Listen, there's a lot of Motherwell content, but I think I try and be a bit football wide and football specific as well, and try to tell the story of what we're doing at the club. So if that's actually if that's interesting to people, or people feel they can get a bit of a feedback from a chief exec trying to be on there and communicating with supporters and how that works, and they can search for my name and we get beat on a match day to see all the abuse that I get, then so be it. Find me on there and I'll try and be as responsive as I can be.
Terrific. Well, yeah, Alan_Burrows on Twitter or Alan Burrows on LinkedIn. And if you do send an invite, please tell Alan you've listened to the podcast. That way you can filter through knowing who to accept. Thank you very much for coming to the podcast. All the best for the season ahead. The challenges are going to that you're going to face over the coming winter. I hope to be in your part of the world sometime soon and maybe catch up for a meat pie of Bovril.
Absolutely. You've been more than welcome. And listen, thanks very much for having me. It's a real honour.
Find out more about Sports Geek's Digital to Dollars process at digitaltodollars.com. We'd love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon.
Thanks again to Alan Burrows. You can send him a tweet. Alan_Burrows, BURROWS, on Twitter. So please send him a tweet. Tell him you've listened. Give him some feedback. He's more than CEOs being on Twitter is a brave space. So I know a few of them that do that. Congratulations, Alan. And I think the thing is, when you start in the space, it's not as hard as going in if you've never been in the space. But being in there, taking on the feedback from fans, I think is valuable. I know I'm doing it with Gravitas myself, both replying to fans and seeing what they're saying about the org. And sometimes it's really hard not to jump in and fight back. But occasionally you just got to resist. Occasionally. More on the gaming front. Please check out Play Media, my new gaming growth agency that I've set up with Chris Derrick. We've got another podcast. You can check that out at weareplaymedia.com, where we tackle the question, why don't more brands market to gamers? So check that out. We Are Play Media. You can subscribe to that at We Are Play Media and subscribe to the YouTube. It's a video-only podcast. It will probably come out in our podcast platforms eventually, but we're just trying video to begin with. And also we've got a Discord. So if you do want to check out and stay in touch with the world of gaming and also understand a platform like Discord, which is the Slack for gamers, you can get the links to that at weareplaymedia.com. And on the esports front, Gravitas, we now have a Valorant team. We just went past our 1 month. We had a Valorant team for 1 month, and we have qualified for First Riot Games Oceanic Championship as one of the top 8 teams of the region. We qualified over the weekend. We are the 7th seed. We take on the 2nd seed Direwolves on Friday night. The boys are competing well, confident, and really any win from here is an upset. But we were the 32nd seed going into the group stage, so we love playing the underdog card. So check it out at Gravitas on Twitter if you want to keep up to date with all things Gravitas. That's it for this week. Thanks again for listening. I really do appreciate it. If you haven't left a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts as they now call it, I know it's a bit difficult. But if you haven't left one, I'd really love you to leave one. 5 stars, obviously, but just tell us what you liked about it. And please recommend it to a friend. I actually think the recommending it to a friend, sending it on to someone is actually more valuable than iTunes. But the iTunes rankings do help people find it a little bit more. I'd love to know how you found it, if it hasn't been from word of mouth. But word of mouth is the best way. So either leave an iTunes review or just send someone a link. Really like this episode, send them a DM, send them a LinkedIn message. I really appreciate that. as we get closer and closer to 600,000 downloads. It's really humbling to have so many people all over around the world listening to each and every episode. So I do really appreciate it. If you would like, don't forget, you can reach me and find all the ways to connect with me at sportsgeekhq.com. Organise a chat or book yourself for a Sports Biz Zoom call by going to sportsgeekhq.com/Zoom calls, or support what we're doing here by going to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. And that's it from me. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
We'd love your support on our Patreon campaign. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. Want to help drive more revenue from your digital efforts? Book a time for a call. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.